Hello, now I'm going to tell you something about John Green books. John Green is a novelist and social media person who wrote 5 of my favorite books. The first one of them is Looking for Alaska. After that, he wrote An Abundance of Catherines. Then he wrote Paper Towns, which I only got in German here. Then he wrote Rogue Grayson and Bill Grayson. And the latest book he wrote is The Fault in Our Stars. First, I'm going to sum them all up. After that, I'm going to tell you something in regular about them, and in the end, I'm going to tell you why I love them so much. First, I'm going to tell you about Looking for Alaska. The book is about Miles, a 16-year-old boy living in a small town. He's obsessed with the last words of famous dead people. And because his dad had been there too, he's going to visit the Culver Creek boarding school. This is where he meets Alaska, a girl who lives 3 rooms next to him. Immediately he falls in love with her, but she's got a boyfriend. They become friends together with a couple of other boys. Alaska loves old books and tells Miles about them, while Miles tells her about the last words of her favorite novelists. Even when she finds a girlfriend for him, he can't forget about her. In one of the last nights in Culver Creek, Miles and his friends, including Alaska and his girlfriend, do a prank on their school. Everything went well. And after a couple of days, all of them hang out at Alaska's room. After a few hours, all of them are a bit drunk, and most of them leave. Only Miles, Alaska, and one of their friends are still there. But their friend is so drunk he doesn't get anything happening around them. And after a few conversations, Alaska and Miles suddenly start making out. Alaska stops when Miles' girlfriend enters her room, but she didn't see anything. Alaska leaves and says that she's got to call someone, while Miles and his girlfriend fall asleep. The next day, someone tells them that Alaska died in a car accident. They're not sure if she committed suicide or if it really was an accident. Miles tries to figure it out lots of months, but he can't. In the end, Miles is writing a text about Alaska's dad and that he's kind of okay with it. Now I'm going to tell you about An Abundance of Catherines. The book is about a boy named Colin, who's struggling with the fact that he's a wonder child and pretty intelligent, but will probably never be a genius because of his lack of a good idea. In his whole life he had 19 girlfriends, who were all named Catherine, and all of them broke up with him. The book starts when Catherine 19 breaks up with him and his best friend wants to go on a road trip to cheer him up. But Colin just got an idea. He tries to create an equation about how long a relationship is going to last and who will end it, but they go on the trip anyway. On the trip they meet a girl named Lindsay. Her mom hires them and lets them live at her place. They are supposed to interview some of the people working in the factory in that small town they all live in. After a bit time Colin and his friends spend in that town, both of them become pretty good friends with Lindsay, and she even helps Colin with his equation. Lindsay happens to have a boyfriend whose name is Colin as well, but through the book the relationship kind of breaks apart. And they actually break up in one of the last chapters. And so at the end of the book, Colin realizes that his equation won't work out and that he's in love with Lindsay. So Colin ends up having his first girlfriend, not named Catherine, but Lindsay, while Lindsay ends up having a second boyfriend whose name is Colin. Okay, next I'm going to tell you something about Paper Towns. This book is about a boy named Quentin, calling himself Q, who's desperately in love with Margot. They first met when Margot's family moved inside the house on the other side of the street, and they soon became friends. Margot loved mysteries and adventures, and even though they had much fun together, they kind of drifted apart. Margot is the most popular girl at high school, and even girlfriend of the quarterback. They have not talked for a long while, especially because Q is not popular at all. But Margot still keeps telling the cool folks not to beat him and his friends up. One night, a week before high school graduation, she suddenly appears in front of Q's window. When he lets her in, she tells him that there are 11 things she has to do and she needs him as her driver. Q accepts and she tells him that her boyfriend cheated on her with her best friend and all of her friends knew about it. So on that night, both of them are doing revenge on a couple of people that definitely deserve it, and as the 11th thing to do, breaking into SeaWorld. Q hopes that after that night everything changes, so at school he's looking out for her. But she isn't there, neither is she in any of the following days. A couple of days later, Margot's parents and a detective come to Q's house and ask him about that night, but he isn't telling them anything. Margot's parents don't really care about Margot running away because it isn't the first time, but Q does. Every time she ran away previously, she had left some clues where she is so that the people she cared about knew she was okay. This time she had left these clues for Q, who followed them till he knew that Margot is in Aglow, New York. Aglow is a made-up city which was made for maps that included such fake cities to know if their maps were getting copied. But Aglow, as one of the most famous paper towns, existed one time when someone actually built a general store in Aglow. Q and his friends are then going on a road trip towards Aglow, even though prom is in 3 days. Q doesn't really care about prom, but his friends do. When they're in Aglow and they find Margot, but she isn't really happy about it because she didn't want to be found. Q's friends are mad at her and want to leave, but Q doesn't, so they leave without him. Q tries to convince Margot to come back home, but she says she now doesn't want to ever go back there, but offers him to come with her. Even though he loves her, he says no because that's not the kind of life he wants for himself. And because he's not going to see her ever again, he tells her that he loves her. So in the end they kiss, but then Q turns around and enters his bus that is bringing him home. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about Will Grayson, Will Grayson. The story is following 2 teenage boys that are both named Will Grayson. One of them is living a quite normal life, including weird parent, girls, and the usual high school stuff. The only thing unusual in his life is his best friend, a gigantic tall guy calling himself Super Gay, whose name is Tiny. Tiny is about to make a musical about himself, and in the cast of it, there's one of his best friends, Jane. Will is pretty much fancying her, but both enjoy the same bands, and when they once meet together with Tiny on a concert, they meet the other Will, who I will call Will 2 in the following for the easiness. Will 2 is there to meet a boy with whom he chatted on the internet, and even though he never thought he was gay, he's kind of in love with that boy, but he isn't coming. When Will 2 then meets the other Will, Jane and Tiny, he starts talking to Tiny, and soon is forgetting about that boy. While Will 1 tries to make Jane like him, even though she thinks about giving her ex-boyfriend a second chance. They all become quite good friends, but Will 2 still can't completely forget about that boy, so he tries to find him. Later he finds out that the boy he was chatting with was actually a girl from his school that kind of fancied him and wanted to find out what things he liked and how to make him like her. Which is pretty upsetting to Will 2, but then he talks to Tiny and everything is okay again, and they even become a couple. Will 1 planned to surprise Jane, but she thought it was her ex-boyfriend who surprised her and planned to give him a second chance. In the end, Will 1 tells Jane that it was him who surprised her and that he loves her, and they become a couple as well. Also, Tiny's musical becomes a great success. And next I'm going to tell you something about The Fault in Our Stars. The book is about Hazel Grace. She's having lung cancer. And in a cancer support group, she first meets Augustus, whose cancer is cured. They meet a couple of times and they both are actually fancying each other, but Hazel just wants to be friends because she's afraid of hurting any more people than necessary by dying. They become really close friends. So there's this book, An Imperial Affliction, which Hazel is obsessed with and Gus is also starting to be. They handle to travel to Amsterdam, where the novelist of An Imperial Affliction lives. They could manage to meet him, but he's the opposite of what they'd expected. He's drunk and insults them and doesn't want to talk about his book at all, but they still have a great trip and even end up becoming a couple. After a bit of time, Gus becomes sick again and gets weaker and weaker every day. In the end, he isn't making it. Hazel Grace is shocked and mad when at Augustus' funeral the novelist of An Imperial Affliction appears. He gives her a letter in which Gus told him how lucky he is to have her and how glad that he could meet her. The book is ending with Hazel reading the letter and starting to get over Gus's death. Now I'm going to tell you something about the books in regular. First, Looking for Alaska. It's the first book by John Green, published 2005. And even though the book was a big success, lots of people criticized it for its offensive language and even for being pornographic and romanticizing death. John Green said about these people that they don't really understand his book and that he never said it would be for kids. The book is much based on his own time in a boarding school, where a student dies under similar circumstances as Alaska did. John Green later said that also other details were ideas that came from his time at his boarding school, and the pranks he described in the book were based on some he pulled at high school. What I love about that book is that it shows that some mysteries don't have to be solved and that you can be happy even though they're not. Now about An Abundance of Catherines. It's the second book published by John Green, 2006. Special about that book is that all the equations used in that book are shown through it. Also, they're all based on real mathematics. John Green, who himself is not really math genius, has a friend whose name is David Biss, and who's one of USA's best mathematicians. He created all the math in the book and even explained them in a couple of pages in the end of it. Also, he said that even though he had two girlfriends named Catherine that both broke up with him, Colin isn't based on him. Now I'm going to tell you something about Paper Towns. It's the third book published by John Green, 2008. It's mostly based on John Green's own experience with paper towns and a road trip he was on while his junior year at college. Paper Towns has a movie adaptation that, except for a couple of changes that were big but didn't really affect the plot, is similar to the book. In the movie, Q is played by Nat Wolff and Margot by Cara Delevingne. The book describes in a really beautiful way that how often we expect more things of things or people that they actually are. This is shown best by one of my favorite quotes. What a treasured thing to believe, that a person is more than a person. Then Will Grayson and Will Grayson. It's the fourth book by John Green, published 2010, and he wrote it together with the novelist David Levitin. The book's narrative is divided between both Wills, and John Green wrote the first Will Grayson, who's in love with Jane, while David Levitin wrote the second Will Grayson, who then falls in love with Tiny. Because both worlds don't really meet in the first chapters, John Green and David Levitin wrote them separated from each other. When they then were reading the chapters of the other one, they immediately knew it would work. What I really enjoy about Will Grayson is that at some points, even though it's a classic love story, it never feels like a cliché. At last, I'm now going to tell you something about The Fault in Our Stars. It's the latest book by John Green, and it was published 2012. The idea for the book came John Green when he, as a student, worked in a child's hospital. He wanted to show that the sickness of these kids doesn't make them less human. In his book, he describes Hazel as being someone afraid of being someone whose whole existence is only based on having cancer. He finally wrote it when he met Esther Earle, a 16-year-old girl who was a big fan of him and had cancer. She died a half year after they met. In the book, Hazel and Gus travel to Amsterdam, which is John Green's favorite city. Also, Gus has a fear of oblivion, which John Green shares, even though he himself says that oblivion is inevitable. The Fault in Our Stars is John Green's first book to be adapted into a movie. The cast includes Ansel Elgort as Gus, Shailene Woodley as Hazel, and Nat Wolff, who plays the lead character in Paper Towns, here playing a secondary character. My favorite thing about these books in regular is, first of all, that they're written very good and pretty intelligent. It's not possible to read one of these books without questioning your whole life and every decision you've ever made. And it just feels as if you're living a better life from then on. Also, I can guarantee you that on every page you read, there'll be something great. You can turn some random page and read something beautiful, like, that's the thing about pain, it demands to be felt. And then you turn another page and read, it's not my fault that my parents own the world's largest collection of Black Santas. Which I find awesome. Thank you for listening.